All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to our March RTD webinar. We've got quite a good turnout today, which is fantastic to see, particularly given we've got such an important topic to discuss. So for those who don't know me, Josh Devitt, I'm the Chief Engineer at IPWA New South Wales and ACT. And we're joined today by Craig Walker from Transport for New South Wales, who's going to run us through the traffic control at worksite standard, or the update to that standard, I guess, Craig. We do have some functionality here within the webinar if you want to ask questions. So there's a Q&A tab. Please do put your questions either in there. There's also a chat function which provides some avenues for comments or questions as well. So the team and I will keep an eye on that as we're going through, and there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. But without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Craig, to kick us off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joshua, and obviously good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be able to come along and provide you with an update on what's happening with the traffic control at work sites. We've called it a manual for many years, but it's soon to be called a standard. But many of you would know of it as TCAWS, or in terms of its actual acronym that is widely used. I've got a fair few slides here to run through, but hopefully we will get through in the time we have. Sorry, I'll just cue that back. Really, there's quite a selection of things I want to cover today, and you can sort of see there's a variety of higher level things around the scope and changes to the document, a bit about departures and concessions to the document, temporary speed limits. Also wanted to talk about portable traffic control devices, a bit about short-term low-impact work convoys, end-of-queue management, rolling block special events, oversized vehicle signs, worker fitness for duty, and a bit about where we currently are at with the standard in terms of what the next release, and then finally a bit about our web pages. So there's quite a lot to get through there, but I will quite quickly move through the slides, but certainly happy to take any questions on, obviously, via the FAQ or chat function or whatever's available. In terms of scope and key changes, I suppose the key one to call out here is that we're changing it from TCAWS from being a technical manual to be a Transport for New South Wales standard. And largely that's probably just around the way in the format that it's written in. It will still have sort of mandatory requirements as the current manual has. It still have recommended approaches to temporary traffic management, and it will still have sort of options. So it still sort of has the same sort of flavour of different approaches depending on whether it's a mandatory item or otherwise. But I suppose one key change is this second dot point here is traditionally the TCAWS manual has only been mandatory for Transport for New South Wales works. With this next release, we'll be requiring it to be applied for all works or any sort of temporary traffic management across New South Wales, regardless of who's doing the actual work. And that's obviously a big shift, but that is based on legal advice around Transport's role in providing guidance around the use of regulatory signs and devices. The third dot point, obviously, we're really updating the standard or TCAWS, obviously, to make sure it's aligned with new and current legislation and policies, etc. I suppose a few more call outs. It's sort of ultimately we're aiming for continual improvement here around temporary traffic management, improving safety. As we all know, safety at work sites is paramount, but ultimately safety at a work site is not just about worker safety, it's also about road user safety. And when you look at the crash statistics, a large portion of crashes that occur at roadwork sites are actually just road users driving through the work site. So we've got to continually strive to improve safety, both for our workers on site and for the road users driving through those sites. In terms of some of the changes to TCAWS, we have obviously expanded the scope in terms of requiring it to be applied across all roads in New South Wales. There's certainly updated content in this next release, new mandatory requirements, enhanced guidance in a lot of cases. And I suppose over the next 3/4 of an hour, I'll endeavour to unpack some of those and give you some insight into what it looks like. But very shortly, we will be sending it out for comment. So I do want to raise that up front that this is all about the draft that we've got ready to come out for comment. that we will welcome your feedback on, but it's really just giving you a bit of a first-hand preview. So I suppose some other changes just to call out are we have had to rewrite the manual a lot to align with the transport standards template. So essentially, I suppose over the last few years, as we've moved from being roads and maritime and merged into transport, we've got a consistent framework now around how our standards must be written. So that's, I suppose, the rules I've got to play by when it comes to developing the manual and obviously turning it into a standard. It's got to be in that format and comply with that editorial style guide. So I suppose there's some broader parameters there. So I suppose the key message there is when you get the draft, you'll probably look at it and say, well, gee, they've changed and moved stuff around. It's been rewritten here a lot. A lot of that's to align with this new format. We've certainly updated references and terms and provided more definitions and found in some cases we've been missing a definition or two and things like that we've adjusted. We've improved and provided some more structure around departures from the manual, as in when you can't comply with the standard and you need to do an alternative approach. And there's also a sort of a cutover point there when you need to do a concession to a transport standard, as in TCAWS. Continually working to harmonise where we can with Ausroad Guide to Temporary Traffic Management and the Australian standard. And certainly we've also been incorporating enhanced guidance and requirements based on some research around end-of-queue management in particular, but obviously also around other new devices, and also improving our guidance around how we approve those sorts of new signs and innovations, etc. I suppose a few of the key focus areas, and you start breaking the standard apart. Certainly we've touched on, I suppose, from the front to back, essentially, that we've looked at and worked on the whole of the standard from front to back. Things like, traffic management planning, temporary speed zones, portable traffic control devices, crash attenuators, work vehicle convoys, short-term low-impact work, end-of-queue management, aftercare for when sites are unattended. I suppose what I'm trying to say with this slide is that we've covered a whole breadth of different areas, and there's quite a lot of change and quite a lot of improvement that's gone into it. But on a more practical level, one thing I would call out also is we've been very conscious of putting more diagrams into the standard to make it more practically focused where we can to, I suppose, explain those sort of concepts that are better explained in a visual sort of diagram rather than text, because we are very conscious that our core audience for the standard are practically focused frontline sort of teams, rather than I suppose back office sort of engineering type people, if I can put it in those very blunt terms. It's really about making sure as much as possible, we're speaking to our target audience. In terms of the concessions and departures, I won't spend too much time on this, but really, I suppose the key thing to highlight here is that the TCAWS manual and now next edition standard has always had a departure process. Certainly the last couple of editions have, which really led practitioners through a risk assessment process to then get an approval to actually do an alternative approach. Now, we want to retain that sort of fairly flexible approach, but there are some situations where some requirements we need to go to a higher level approach, which is really this Transport for New South Wales concessions process. Now, again, this is something that really the concessions process is a transport-wide approach. What we're doing, and you can sort of see from this diagram, we've sort of broken it into higher risk type elements like road design requirements, lane widths, and those sort of core safety type aspects would go through a concessions process because they are very fundamental to the road design and road safety. But there's lots of mandatory requirements in TCAWS which might be more work practice based. How far apart we set up the cones or how far apart the signs are and things like that. That can still be, managed quite adequately through the existing departure process. So essentially what we're trying to do here is a hybrid approach where we triage the departure based on whether it's low risk or high risk, and obviously the higher risk ones we put an increased focus on. Next thing I wanted to just cover off a bit on was temporary speed limits. I suppose this one's a bit topical because there has been a lot of movement in government around this one over the last couple of years, in particular last 6 months. And really, the New South Wales government's had a priority for some time, and it dates back to even an election commitment around improving practice around the use of temporary speed limits, particularly roadworks speed limits. But I suppose just to unpack that a bit firstly in terms of context, roadworks speed limits, or more to the point, temporary speed limits, are used for a variety of purposes. Beyond roadworks, we often use them for putting out and managing the risks associated with some sort of traffic hazard, be it pavement damage, a loose surface, or whatever. You obviously can think of other examples. But we also put them out when managing, traffic for events, like special events. Could be, obviously, you've got the mega scale events like the City to Surf in Sydney, but in the reality, there's lots around New South Wales. There's lots of smaller to medium scale events, and I'm just thinking Henty Field Day out in Western New South Wales, southwestern New South Wales. There's all sorts of events that are occurring, and often traffic management's required for those. The third one there is often in situations, particularly in some of the transport corridors out of the Sydney environment, we implement traffic management for holiday traffic management, trying to manage those big flows of traffic out of the Sydney area, metro area. And traditionally, we've used roadwork speed limits for these sorts of situations, and ultimately, it just gives the wrong impression and ultimately drives a bit of community angst about, well, there's no roadwork happening here. Why am I being held up, and things like that. So I think that to some extent that's setting the scene there. In terms of government, really they've had some ongoing representations around the inappropriate use of speed limits. And that sort of led to back to prior to the current government coming into power, led to an election commitment around removing roadworks speed limits when there were no roadworks underway and it's safe to do so. And in terms of that, really that background, that led to a bill going through New South Wales Parliament last year, in September last year, which inserted this additional requirement into the Roads Act that a roads authority must install, maintain and remove roadworks speed limit signs in accordance with the standard published by Transport for New South Wales. Now, I've paraphrased the actual content in that clause, that section a bit, but it also goes on to say there that in that same section that it really extends to other organisations who have been given approval to implement temporary speed limits, civil contractors, traffic management contractors, etc. And really the actual section of the Roads Act that's been inserted is referring to the standard published by Transport. And just to clarify, that is the TCAWS. That is the TCAWS. That will be sort of going the Government Gazette to link that back to TCAWS. These new requirements come into force once this next release of TCAWS is published. But I suppose I'm just calling out that there is now this bit of legislation saying if you're going to do a temporary speed limit, you need to comply with the TCAWS standard. But I suppose just some more broader aspects around temporary speed limits, they're really only effective if they change driver behaviour. Now, we're probably all driven through work sites or other locations where there's temporary speed limits and they've been unrealistic, and really they haven't modified the driver behaviour to the extent that's been expected or hoped. So really it's about thinking and doing temporary speed limits with a level of nuance so that you're applying a limit that's realistic for the risks involved and managing traffic, like as you would in terms of broader traffic management. You've got to be able to, the road environment's got to really tell that story to the road user of why they need to reduce speed. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work. And as I've said, it's said in the second dot point, inappropriate use of temporary speed limits undermines their credibility. And really, at the end of the day, they are administrative control, and it's really reliant on road users complying with them. But they are there for the safety also of workers and road users. And you can sort of see a couple of examples in those photos, or obviously why we would introduce a temporary speed limit, whether it be the proximity of workers to traffic or potentially a hazard, like obviously that excavation next to traffic. I suppose a few things we're doing in the next release that's about to come out for comment. We have been revising and improving the way the content's put together and reinforcing key principles and technical requirements. We do, again, emphasise that when it's safe to do so, the temporary speed limit must be removed or increased. And obviously that aligns with the government commitment around improving practice. But we're also really, I suppose, providing much more flexibility in the signposting options. And you can sort of see on the bottom of the screen that the bottom left is what we've traditionally used pretty much for any temporary speed limit. We put out the R4212, which is the speed limit with roadwork written underneath. But there's lots of circumstances, as I mentioned, where that's really sending the wrong message, and if anything, encouraging people to be upset about the situation because there's no roadwork there. It might just be a traffic hazard or whatever. So that's where, as you can sort of see in the bottom of the screen, we're introducing a lot more options around different signposting, like just the use of a standard speed sign with traffic hazard next to it, or combinations of other signs, speed signs with explanatory notes underneath them. And that's really about trying to be really upfront and be really honest with the road user community about, well, why is there a temporary speed limit? And just be really transparent about it. If it's damaged pavement and we're not going to be able to repair it for 3 weeks, let's not put a roadwork speed limit out. Let's put a speed limit with a traffic hazard that says it as it is. I'll keep moving along. I'll talk a little bit about portable traffic control devices and truck-mounted attenuators. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Hopefully it behaves itself a bit better now. Apologies. Just portable traffic control devices. I suppose we've had some requirements in the previous edition around the use of portable traffic control devices to, I suppose, drive industry change away from using stop-go VATs in higher speed environments. And really, I suppose we're finding it, and these requirements are more about what we require of transport work sites. But obviously, it's probably more of a recommendation for councils and other organisations around where they might go to with this. But we are certainly tightening up the requirements for transport work sites to remove some of the latitude there. And what I'm getting at by that is that in some cases we're finding that some contractors, delivery partners, etc., are risk assessing out the use of portable devices when it's more appropriate to use them. So we are tightening up the requirements there. And that's really what I'm getting at by being more prescriptive. But there's also some exemptions where we're sort of taking a bit more of a pragmatic approach. We might say, well, hey, you've got a rural highway with a very small road coming from to the side of it. Is there really benefit in putting a portable device on a road that might have 50 vehicles a day on or something like that? So trying to be a bit more nuanced around where we get the most benefit from them as well. But also providing some extra use cases where there's value in using them, such as controlling 2 lanes of traffic. And you might say, well, gee, Craig, what's the benefit? And that obviously is there's lots of, normally if you're going to control traffic with a traffic control device or a traffic controller, essentially you've got to merge the traffic into a single lane. It's a lot of setup, a lot of exposure to do that. Whereas if stopping the traffic in 2 lanes with a set of signals on either side is very much like what we currently do at any other permanent set of traffic signals. So why not do it also with portable signals where it removes a lot of that exposure of workers in the setup of long merge tapers and things like that. Particularly relevant if you're doing like short-term work like survey, and we've had examples of that where they need to do some survey work, stop traffic for 15 minutes or 5 minutes at a time or a few times, and ultimately, something like that would be a more effective and safer option than obviously going through quite a large setup for stopping or merging traffic into a single lane. You also apply that same sort of approach with duplicating signal displays on both sides of the road to get better visibility of lanterns and things like that. So just, as I said, providing some more options around the use of the technology, because ultimately the technology with these types of devices has improved a lot over even over the last few years. Truck mounted attenuators, I won't go into a lot of detail on this, so I appreciate that sometimes this is probably more relevant on the higher volume, heavier traffic road environments, particularly motorways that transport often is usually obviously looking after. But I would call out here that the current version of the manual is very much just focused on truck mounted attenuators. We are moving and have moved away from that because there's lots of different options coming out into the marketplace more and more. And you can sort of see from these photos, the top one there is obviously that traditional truck mounted attenuator that many of you would obviously know and have potentially worked with at times. There are trailer mounted ones that are available. And certainly I don't put the trailers quite in the same category as a truck. I think probably a trailer is probably better for a lower speed environment. But there's also these other products. This Arrester 100 was accepted, I should say, by ASBAP, Ausroads Safety Barrier Assessment Panel last year, and has been accepted by Transport. It's a attenuator that you essentially tow out as a trailer and then you lower it onto the road, and it sort of works on friction rather than the mass of the vehicle so much. So these, I suppose, the trailer ones and this Arrester, these friction-based ones, I suppose, are opening up potential opportunity there around the use of attenuators in environments that are a bit traditionally weren't cost effective to use a truck mounted attenuator in, potentially, or in locations where there aren't the truck ones available. Obviously these devices, these two on the bottom, are also much more lower cost. So I suppose it helps to give you the option of using them in environments where traditionally a truck one hasn't been used. So it's more just to raise some awareness there. We're also working with Ausroads on a project around research and development of technical guidance around the use of TMA devices. And the first tranche of that project was to publish a research report, and you can sort of see I've got an image of that research report on the slide. That was published in February, and it's on the Ausroad website. That's really about gathering the knowledge and research around from both within Australia and internationally around the use of attenuators, particularly truck-mounted attenuators. So sort of information and knowledge gathering exercise in the research report. The second part of that is the publication of a technical guidance document around the use of TMA devices. So that would be an extra part. At this stage, my understanding is an extra part to the Ausroad Guide to Temporary Traffic Management. And that would be more about taking the knowledge and learning from that research report and putting it into practical application. A bit more about where we're going with the TCAWS standard. We have added some content around short-term low-impact work, and largely that was already in the manual, but really what we're doing here is aligning with the terminology used in Ausroads around short-term low-impact work and endeavouring to align TCAWS with that, the similar sort of approach to what the Ausroad Guide has. So I suppose some examples of this short-term low-impact work are things like site investigation, geotech, survey, etc. Obviously roadside maintenance, litter collection, all those sort of very short-term activities where it might be more appropriate to use sort of a frequently changing work site or intermittent type work rather than putting a normal static work site in. I suppose this is an example. I'm not sure if my little animation will work. My team developed this, but really you might notice it's sort of the animation. But so really this is, I suppose, taking what would traditionally be used in terms of like an intermittent work approach, where you'd have like a spotter and a worker looking for gaps in traffic and then moving out. And let's say it's a survey sort of scenario where they just need to take a few shots along the centre line to pick up the centre line, or where they'd have a lookout person and then the actual worker would do intermittent type work. This sort of example, which was in the next release, is about saying, well, yeah, that's okay, but maybe there's also scope here to put in to do something between just pure intermittent work where you don't have any controls at all, you just have flashing lights, and also a static site. So this has got the addition of a shadow vehicle and some advanced warning signage. Again, by reducing the speed down to 60, it gives them more opportunity around the actual gaps they're using, and obviously a bit more assurance around how they use those gaps and work near traffic. So there's obviously much more content around that, but just giving you a bit of a flavour of that. Work vehicle convoys. I suppose at the moment, the current TCAWS manual really takes a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to convoys. And this is an area we've identified that really we need to provide much more guidance on, because, if you're even doing like mobile work or short-term low impact work where you're moving from different locations along, say, a motorway, that's very different to obviously a urban road like Victoria Road, for example, and obviously very different to what you see behind me, which is the Newell Highway in Western New South Wales. And of course, there's other roads and council roads that are obviously much lower traffic volume as well. So what we're aiming to do with this piece is to really give more guidance around, well, what sort of speed environment and traffic conditions do you have, and that will influence what the composition of your actual convoy is. Because obviously having that sort of convoy you can see on the top of the screen there for doing verge mowing along a regional road in Western New South Wales, or even some transport roads, is unrealistic. Even the Newell Highway, I think that it would be too much. But obviously in a motorway environment, it would obviously be a different situation. So what we've sort of got in the next manual, we've really tried to break it out, and this is just a bit of an example, really about providing guidance on the minimum convoy for different types of scenarios. So obviously different road environments, but also whether you're working in the traffic lane, whether you're on the road shoulder or with the outside the traffic lane and shoulder, in other words, well back on the verge. This table is a sample of what's in the next release, where it's really, this one's particularly for outside the traffic lane, but it's really trying to categorise based on the volume vehicles per day, and then also how far away you are from the travel lane, and obviously the speed limit going across here to give then a categorisation of what sort of convoy you might need. And obviously less than 1,500 and greater than or at least 1.5. We're saying there, well, if it's 60 or less, then you don't really need a convoy. Whereas obviously you're getting down here to more than 10,000, greater than 90 kilometres an hour. We're into category D, which is a shadow vehicle, tail vehicle, advanced warning vehicle. So I think you can probably see there that what we're trying to do is graduate the number of vehicles in a convoy based on the potential level of risk, considering traffic volume, speed, offset from the travel lane, etc. And there's a similar table in there about working actually when you're working in the travel lane as well. End of queue management. I'll touch on this a bit. This is a fairly important piece of work because we have been doing a lot of research around this, and Transport, jointly funded with Deakin University and iMove CRC, a work zone end of queue management study that's been done over the last two to three years. I think it really wrapped up, I should say, midway through last year. But it was all about reducing the incidence of end of queue crashes, and we often have end of queue crashes. And initially, when this research was started, it was probably about a third of crashes at roadwork zones were end of queue related. Over the time, that's now down to probably about a quarter, but there's still a sizable number of end of queue related crashes at roadwork sites. So we're really conscious of providing more guidance and more practical measures that can lessen that risk. You can sort of see on the right-hand side that's the Deakin report, research report that was published. It was about a 450-page long document. It really went into trialling a whole series of different treatment options for managing the end of queue risk. I think we ended up trialling about 25 to 30 different treatment options, and obviously it aimed to categorise those ones that were most effective. Really what we've been doing since then is turning that research report into practical guidance in this TCAWS standard, so that a practitioner can pick it up and say, well, hey, I'm in this sort of road environment. What should I do? I've got this I see my risk as this. What measures should I put in place? And the aim there is we've given 3 different levels of risk, like a level 1, which is like a lower risk, level 2, a medium risk, and level 3, a high risk. And for each of those levels, we've given a number of different treatment options. So we're not trying to lock someone into saying, well, you've got that level of risk, you have to do exactly that. We've given a selection of options over here to put in place. And obviously that's really aimed at taking into account there is still a lot of variability in the road network out there, and obviously and different types of work and all that sort of stuff. We've got to have a bit of flexibility there. I suppose a couple of examples of the different treatment options. This is an example of what you call like a level 1, which is like a lower risk option, which maybe that's your sort of baseline for a rural highway or something like that. But really you can sort of see we've duplicated the prepare to stop signs, and we've provided duplicated traffic queue ahead signs with the prepare to stop. You'd be surprised some cases we don't get this in terms of the current practice of duplication on both sides of the road. So we are pushing, this is I suppose the baseline treatment for a transport worksite particularly. A level 2 treatment's a bit more advanced in terms of similar sort of duplication of the prepare to stop signs, but now we've got some similar sort of queue warning prepare to stop sign, but with the addition of flashing lights. Now, some people might say, oh, gee, flashing lights, does that really make a difference? Interestingly enough, out of all the different treatments that were trialled, this sign came up as one of the top most effective ones, just as a sign with some couple of flashing lights rather than anything particularly, innovative in terms of technology. But hopefully those couple of examples give you a bit of an idea of the different levels. And of course, in a motorway, a higher risk environment, we have more measures again, but it's really about layering on some extra queue management measures. I suppose moving on to like rolling block special event signs, and I'll just make sure I haven't jumped a slide there, sorry. Special events, and I suppose this is a bit of a grab bag of a few different things we just wanted to highlight. Certainly we've added content around the use of rolling blocks, and you can sort of see from that animation there that really a rolling block's about obviously keeping the traffic behind escort vehicles. In this example, they're using 2 truck-mounted attenuators to either slow or completely stop the traffic to allow a work activity to occur up in advance of the rolling block. Now this may not be so relevant for lower volume roads, but certainly in some higher volume situations, it can be more effective than putting in formal traffic control. And it was used recently for a bridge girder lift up in the Hexham M1 to Raymond Terrace project, rather than putting in traffic control and having to stop traffic in a single lane, and also in a very, I suppose, challenging location. They used a rolling block for each time they needed to stop traffic to do a girder lift, and they had exceptional productivity through using this approach, but also far better safety outcomes because they weren't putting traffic controllers on the roadside in very challenging, difficult sort of locations at night in what would you'd call a low safety sort of scenario. So and ultimately TCAWS, didn't have content around this. It should have had it, but we're putting that in now. A few other things to call out: special events. We've been adding lots of special event signs and things like that to the traffic sign register. And really that goes back to that same thing about the roadworks speed limits. We want to make sure that you've got sign posting options to really clearly communicate to road users why there are changed traffic conditions. And rather than needing to use things like roadwork ahead signs, you can actually use an event ahead sign. These are all based on the Australian standards, and really it's really about just pulling in and adopting what the Australian standard already has. And that's obviously an example there of how those signs could be used in a road closure for an event. We've also been adding lots more signs for oversize over mass vehicles. So this is again providing some consistent sign options for managing those sorts of vehicles at work sites. Fitness for duty is an important topic that we've added more content on in this next release, around ensuring that workers are fit for duty, and that those sort of requirements are really clearly communicated, even in the TCAWS standard as well as other places. But I suppose the key call outs here is that all workers shall be fit for duty for the entire duration of their shift, including travel to and from the work site. And I suppose one concerning thing around that is that, traffic control industry can sometimes send people extended distances to work at a location, and we need to be considering not only the time they're on site, but also the potential for fatigue risk as they're travelling to, but particularly from, a shift. And obviously if they're travelling a couple of hours each way to do an 8-hour shift, that becomes very concerning around fatigue risk. So we have put a lot more focus on that in this next release. We've also really called out the transport policy around drug and alcohol use as well. And I suppose when we call out the fatigue management and the drug and alcohol policies, that is something that's mandatory for transport works. Now, recognising that the manual's got to be applied across all works in New South Wales, there are some elements in the manual that will call out and say, well, hey, for transport projects, you must comply with this policy and this policy. But obviously, if you're, if you're a council and you want to apply that same approach, well, obviously that's your discretion to do that as well. But I would call out in terms of what we've got in it's those sort of policies are mandatory, not obviously for transport employees like myself, but also workers from industry partners, contractors and subcontractors carrying out work for Transport for New South Wales. So even at the moment, if you're a council doing work for transport under the RMCC contract, that obligation currently exists to ensure that obviously your workers are complying with those policies, but also any subcontractors that might be doing work for you. But I suppose the point of putting it in TCAWS and making sure it's very apparent is that make sure the message is getting out there, because there are issues popping up around things like drug and alcohol use at times. As I said, we've rewritten the fatigue section, increased the focus on the risks that workers face, because as I've already said about, there's a whole thing about them travelling long distances at times to work at a site. In those situations, it would be appropriate for the contractor or subcontractor to be organising accommodation, ensuring they're managing that risk. Also things like working in the cold and heat, working outdoors, working in remote sites, and I've covered off on the driving long distances. And we've really been really clear to highlight that both worker management and contractor subcontractor responsibilities are explicitly outlined. And this all reflects updates to current Transport for New South Wales drug and alcohol policy, and also the fatigue management policies. And as I've called out in the bottom there, we developed this in conjunction with our health and safety branch. Just to give you a bit of a sense of where are we currently at with the next release, what's happening. The draft document's ready for consultation, so we've got it sitting there ready to hit send. There is a consultation period that will commence shortly. We're aiming for that to happen either this week or next week, in terms of getting it out to industry, councils, any external stakeholder, as well as within transport, across our own practitioners, so that you can all have a look at it, what we've got in it, provide feedback, etc. We're planning for about a 4-week sort of consultation period to give plenty of time to have a look at it and provide feedback. Notification of the consultation will be distributed through several channels, including direct emails, and we've got quite an extensive stakeholder list to distribute emails and obviously links, etc., to the document, to councils, industry associations and other stakeholders. We've got our In the Zone newsletter, which we send out. It goes out to roughly about 3,000 or so, 3,100 I think at the moment, different subscribers to that. So if you're not subscribed to that, I would encourage you to sign up to that. Transport also has an infrastructure industry portal, which we'll be posting this information on as well. We have a fact sheet that will go out as well with the draft document that aims to highlight the key changes. It's, as I said at the start, there's a lot of change and adjustment that's gone on, so it is very difficult to give you absolutely everything in a summary, but we have aimed to give you the highlights. But ultimately, after that 4-week consultation, we'll be aiming to address comments as quickly as we can. The time frame for that will obviously vary a little bit depending on how much feedback we get, but we certainly welcome the feedback. We're aiming for publication later in 2026, ideally by the midway through the year. That's where we're aiming. I'll just move on to that next slide. I suppose just to finally sort of close out this presentation just with highlighting a few of our web pages. And the reason I'm doing this is we're actually using web pages as a way of communicating a lot of ancillary information to TCAWS. And I'll just run through this slide, which is trying to get it all onto one slide. So apologies for quite a lot of information here. But we've really got 6 web pages that sit obviously on the transport web site. We've got what we'd call like a temporary traffic management homepage. Well, that's really just more of a landing page that tells a bit about our role and responsibilities in transport, and probably a bit of that more sort of administrative aspect of what we do, etc. But then it really breaks it into a number of different web pages, I should say. We've got one that's focused around the traffic control at work sites. We've got obviously technical manual at the moment, soon it will be renamed standard. And that talks about the TCAWS and technical directions that have been published in the past, some fact sheets around that and some FAQs. Alongside that, we have a page which is all about temporary traffic management templates, checklists and other example documents. Now, this has been an intentional move of taking templates and checklists and things like that out of TCAWS and publishing them separately on a web page, which has allowed us to do things such as publish them in a Word format so that you can pick them up and modify them for your own circumstances and develop them further if you're working in a council environment or something like that. But really, it also gives us that opportunity to publish updates to those templates and more versions of different scale versions of templates independently of the TCAWS process, which is obviously much more governance driven in transport than in terms of me publishing something on a web page. This next one down here is on the bottom, the next sort of row on the left here is all about our temporary traffic management newsletter. We call it the In the Zone temporary traffic management newsletter. And it also has Transport for New South Wales safety alerts on there that are relevant to temporary traffic management. So firstly, the newsletter, obviously, as I said, it gets distributed, calling out things like our consultations, changes, new signs, anything that we want to try and raise awareness of. We're putting articles together, and typically we're aiming for only about 3 maximum 4 different items, and keeping it fairly short and succinct, but also really relevant to topics at the time. So I would encourage you to subscribe to that newsletter. We promise not to spam you with hundreds of newsletters, but really just calling out key topics at the time. The second part of that page, as I said, does provide links to Transport for New South Wales safety alerts that are relevant to temporary traffic management. And as you'd appreciate, Transport publishes lots of safety alerts. We're really picking up the ones that we see are relevant. It might be about the setup and pack up of traffic management. There was some recent incidents where traffic control vehicles have been struck while they're doing U-turns in the setup and pack up. So it's calling out those sorts of issues that are relevant around the temporary traffic management space. So you'll find links there to those safety alerts. This one over in the right middle row is really about just giving a summary of the Safe Work Traffic Control at Work sites training, just calling out some of the key information and providing links over to the Safe Work website for more detail. The final one on the bottom there, I did want to spend a bit more time and calling it out. It's a recent one we've just published, new web page. It's really about picking up all the reference links, etc., in the actual TCAWS manual and providing a summary of all those reference documents and web pages that can be updated real time. And I suppose it gets away from the situation of where we publish TCAWS, we end up with this PDF document, and then someone changes a link on their web page, and our links in TCAWS are no longer valid. We get broken links, and there's a general requirement to avoid putting lots of links in our standards, and that's a requirement that comes from our standards team. So this web page is really a way of giving you a resource point to find all these different links and all these different resources without embedding them into TCAWS itself. And there's extra stuff there around things like different data platforms that Transport has around traffic volumes and bus movements and all sorts of other data sources that can be helpful as well. And it obviously supports both the TCAWS standard as well as our G10 traffic management specification. I won't go into too much detail. There is obviously a website link, but really just to give you a sense that we've broken it into categories like Transport for New South Wales web pages, transport standards, specifications and supplements. Now these are all drop-down boxes. I should emphasise that when you open them up, they'll give you a number of different items for that category, and you can sort of see some other categories there as well. I'll keep on moving on, just mindful of time. How do you find these web pages? You can obviously, as I had on that last slide, I can give you long web URLs, but that's not really going to help you too much. So I have put these QR codes in there. There's one here for our temporary traffic management homepage. And essentially, if you go on any of those pages, there's links at the bottom that will take you to all the other pages. They are cross-referenced. So by getting to any of those pages, you'll be able to navigate through those other five. I have given you a QR code for the TCAWS standard itself, so being probably obviously the subject of this presentation. But if all else fails, you don't have those QR codes, as you know, search engines are pretty good now, whether you use Google, Bing or something else. Generally, if you search for those sorts of terms that I've got there, you'll definitely get to our pages. So you'll be able to find that info. And I suppose this is a final advertisement around our In the Zone temporary traffic management newsletter. And as I said earlier, it's really about informing you of proposed changes to transport requirements. That's why we obviously want to make sure we get the message out about the upcoming new release of, well, I should say, the version that's about to come out for consultation of the next release, so we can get that feedback. Because ultimately, we really view that the feedback we can get from groups like yourself and industry and others obviously helps to improve the manual. We don't have all the answers ourselves, so that's why we want to get good feedback on what we've put together. And there might be in some cases, some things you say, well, Craig, you haven't really covered this enough or whatever. We might be able to address that during the consultation, but we are also mindful that we need to get this version published because then we will move on to the next edition after that. So it might be a case that you put feedback in and we say, yep, we can address that now, or it might be you need to wait. But either way, we will value that feedback. Obviously, it's also about communicating when we have updated things, and obviously when new versions come out, new signs and devices, and obviously there's a QR code there as well. And really, I'll leave it at that. I've probably run a little bit longer than expected. Unfortunately, sorry about the tech issues, but hopefully everyone was able to continue.
All good. Thanks, Craig. And I think we've all had those tech issue problems in the past, so I appreciate that. That's always tough when it happens. Please, if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat or the Q&A. Craig, we've had a couple that came in throughout your presentation. One from John Harrison. I think this is more of a comment than a question. Was noting one of the plans you had on the screen talked about needing vehicles to manage overtaking traffic or potential overtaking traffic. So I think there's more of a comment than a question. So just something to note. For Trent, for short-term works, is it a requirement to have a person in the shadow vehicle, which could be the vehicle operator, exiting the vehicle to be the designated lookout person at the temporary work site? So I guess that's around the resource management and the staffing requirements.
Yeah, I think there's I suppose that obviously comes down to risk as well in terms of where you're working, because ultimately if it's on a lower volume road, it might be quite reasonable for that shadow vehicle operator to get out of the vehicle and actually do that lookout function, and as in park their vehicle further up the road. So there is a bit of a nuance around risk required here, and whereas higher volume roads, you may not even be doing that sort of type of work at all.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Craig. Question here from Barry. Sign branding. Why has the need for traffic control name and phone number on the back of signs been removed? We see lots of unbranded signs and have no idea who is performing the traffic control.
Yeah.
Can this be made mandatory again?
Well, that's actually a really easy one to answer, because we actually are in this next release requiring that to be mandatory. And I did have a slide in there, but I had to do a bit of a colon on slides. And we are very conscious of the value in having branding on signs and vehicles, so there's accountability there for who's doing the work.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Craig. All right, any more questions? Pop them in. So, Craig, just to recover the consultation, so you said that'll be up in a couple of weeks, week or two, with a view to publish this towards the end of the year. So how long do you envisage that consultation period being for?
We're 4 week. We aim for a 4-week period.
Yeah.
So really just in the final stages at the moment, waiting for the final approval to hit go, and then it'll all come out.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we'll certainly funnel that information once it's available through our newsletter and website. But obviously, if you're signing up to the Craig's newsletter as well, you'll capture that information in there.
Yep.
Look, I think we're probably out of questions. So, Craig, thank you very much for coming along and presenting today. And I know you're covering quite a bit of information. So we have recorded this session. If people want to go back and cover off any of the particular points that were raised, it'll be up on our website before too long. A quick mention that our next webinar will be on the 15th of April, and we'll be looking at some work we've been doing with recycled materials. So keep an eye out for that one. And thanks all for your attendance today.